what are signs of emotional manipulation that are typically used by abusers, you'll see right up at the top of the list is like manipulating someone by threatening to self-delete is a very common emotional manipulation tactic used by abusers. So the fact that we're seeing that same argumentative line used by the trans activist saying, like, if you don't give this child what the child is demanding, then they're going to off themselves, and using that as a bludgeon to force through medical protocols that do not come up to snuff when regards to evidence-based medicine and the systematic evidence reviews that have done to evaluate the efficacy and safety of these gender medicine protocols for children. Because it's one thing when we're dealing with adults who can make rational decisions and they can rationally choose to engage in experimental medicine, or they can rationally choose to take on the risk. They can become informed. They can make a decision and be like, look, there's not as much science here as I would like, but I still want it because I'm an adult and I'm going to exercise my autonomy to be an adult and like choose the medical pathway that I want to. But when you're a child, you do not have that capability to make that informed decision, particularly when the ramifications of that decision have impacts on things that you can't possibly have an informed choice about. When you are 14 years old, you are not going to know for sure whether you want to have children at 30 years old. And given that wanting children is such a fundamental aspect of the human thing, to deprive a child of that choice at 30 just because at they're 14, their short-term desires are saying one thing. And this whole idea of like, oh, well, you know, if we don't allow these medical protocols, which have not been shown to be effective in the systematic evidence reviews, and in Europe, where they first rolled out these protocols for children, giving, you know, young children puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones at a very young age, they rolled that out as experimental medicine in Europe, and those countries that first implemented those experimental gender medicine protocols, they are rolling them back in Europe due to the subsequent evidence after they rolled them out, coming back and looking and saying, like, actually, these experimental protocols that we implemented, they don't seem to be doing what we thought they were going to do. There's not enough evidence that this is actually improving the things we want to improve. For example, their mental health. There's not strong evidence that this is actually improving the mental health. And going back to these claims of, like, you know, threatening self-deletion if you don't you know, do this for these kids, most of these children coming into the gender clinics these days, they have a whole host of comorbid mental health issues: anxiety, depression, autism, OCD, trauma, sexual abuse, you know, adverse childhood experiences, a whole host of mental health issues. And you know what all those mental health issues correlate with? A risk for suicidal ideation. So how can we say that, oh, well, this other thing they have, gender confusion or gender incongruence, that is the only thing causing the like suicidal ideation. So if we focus on the gender stuff, all their mental health issues will be somehow magically resolved, and we're going to cure their depression, cure their anxiety, cure their autism, all these things. No, the evidence suggests that when you put them on these gender protocols and you don't focus on these other comorbid mental issues, all you do is just like, okay, they came into the clinic, they said, I'm a trans kid, and then suddenly all the issue is on the gender stuff and not all the comorbid mental health issues that are likely playing a greater role in the suicidal ideation. So to say that, and there's certain statistical facts that get trotted out that are misleading and based on bad data. For example, this common claim that like 41% of all trans children or trans kids have like attempted suicide, so therefore, you know, they're at this big risk. Well, that was based on one sample of like 27 children with a misrepresented sample. So that 41% statistic is like based on like bad sampling data. And furthermore, there's a world of difference between suicide ideation, thinking about suicide, and suicidal ideation in the context of a cry for help versus actually being at the point of like concretely planning it out, and actually dying as a result of planned suicide. And in that latter case, where it's much more serious, much more indicative of like an underlying mental health issue, it is incredibly rare in the trans community. And there's not signs that the trans community is at higher risk of that in virtue of being trans, as opposed to being at risk of that in virtue of being autistic or depressed or anxious and all these different things. So like this idea that being trans is somehow uniquely suicidal, it's like not borne out by the evidence, but it's one of the common emotional manipulation tactics that the activist community uses to push a protocol that is experimental, and that all the systematic evidence reviews are coming back saying, look, we need to be more cautious. There's not enough evidence to say one way or another whether this is like good for the children. So given that this is experimental stuff, we need to be cautious and just like not jump into it and make it like a matter of political rights, that you have a right to alter your natural like puberty development as like a child just because like you want to. It's just. And so I don't know, I'll just leave it there. I have much to say on this topic.